So I'm recording now, and let me go ahead and share my screen here. And let me bring up the chat and everything just so I'm aware. Hello to everybody in the virtual world that does and does not exist at the same time. So I wanted to start off with sort of putting forward, after providing all the feedback on the WD3s, I wanted to sort of outline like 3 core things that, like, if I was going to say, these are the 3 things that I felt like I was talking about a lot in response to everybody's drafts, in terms of things to keep in mind when it comes to revising your WD3 towards your RD3. And I'll go ahead and turn the captions on here as well, just they might be useful for some. So one thing is to be sure to have a sense of context in the introduction about 2 different things. And we're going to look at examples of these things, but I just want to lay out these overall suggestions. You know, in your introduction, we always assume like, well, I need to introduce whatever, field I'm going to talk about, and I'm going to, and then I'm going to connect to my central claim. Well, we need to do a little more than that. You need to introduce your field, but then also give us a sense of context, meaning kind of what's going on in terms of what problems or drawbacks or limitations are there in the field, right? The premise of this paper is thinking about how we can sort of re-envision or come up with ideas about how a particular field could be enhanced or could be better. So part of that is setting up in your introduction, right? So let's say I'm writing about law enforcement or something like that. And so I'm going to want to bring up, obviously, some of the issues that we have in relation to law enforcement, our police brutality, right? And the sort of overwhelming and devastating, in particular, killing of people of color at the hands of police. But these issues also come up with like connections of the police to the communities that they serve, police oversight and police investigations in terms of investigating any kinds of abuses once complaints are made. So all those things are important. So in my introduction, I wouldn't just introduce law enforcement and explain what law enforcement is in my introduction. We already know that. But I am going to want to set up the sort of context that we're currently in terms of the limitations and problems there are with law enforcement. And then I also want to bring up a context about what changes could take place, what could happen, what are things that we could do, whether they're technologies we could bring into play or certain ideas that we could, take on. Maybe we have completely separate sort of investigatory, branch or independent that investigates sort of law enforcement abuses. Maybe we have much more transparency surrounding officer records and, whatever it might be. So I'm setting 2 contexts. I'm setting what are the sort of drawbacks and limitations? Am I setting that up in the field in the introduction? And then how these things could be better or are getting better with current things that are in place. And what that does is it sets up the issue, if you will, right? It sets up the problem, the tension that can then lead into my central claim statement. So those matters of context, when I'm writing about that in my point comment on your draft, it's usually what I'm referring to on that end. The other thing is that a lot of people were talking about like they couldn't find sources for their topic, or they couldn't find the right quotes, or find the perfect quote. And one thing I want you to keep in mind is that we're only using outside quotes, very different from a research paper, right? A research paper or a research report, its job is just to explain all the different ideas that are out, not all the different ideas, but explain and sort of and describe and show the different ideas that are out there in relationship to a particular topic. Okay, so in that case, I'm going to be using a lot of outside quotes. I'm not going to be doing much of my own analysis and argumentation in a research report, because that's not the goal of that kind of essay. We're not doing that. We are doing our own argumentative analysis. We need our own central claim. We need our own subclaims. We're providing our own perspective. So your outside quotes and outside sources are not, they should not be the bulk of your evidence and examples. The bulk of your evidence and examples should be your own ideas. So you'll notice I say here that specific evidence and or hypothetical examples. Now, what I mean by specific evidence are things like, let's say, I'm going to stick with a law enforcement example. So like specific evidence would be like, the fact that they banned, I don't know if it was, I think it was de Blasio that did, banned chokeholds in New York City. I live in New York City. So they banned chokeholds in New York City in law enforcement. So that, would be specific evidence. And I'd go and find the details about that and bring that in, right? A hypothetical example would be something like maybe that isn't being used yet, or maybe something that I only know a little bit about, that I could then describe how it would be useful. So like I brought up this idea of maybe having a more independent branch that does oversight over law enforcement and provides more transparency about law officer complaints, right? And I might talk about like, in some cases it would be useful if there was a website for each precinct that had a kind of log of all complaints or all complaints on record, that had the background records of each officer on it. And now that thing doesn't exist, but I'm using a hypothetical example, right, to support my subclaim in that paragraph. So it's not that I need to go find all these quotes to back myself up, right? Yeah, I think we need something like, I think that's 4 quotes in this paper, but the majority of the analysis of my support paragraph should be based off evidence and examples, much of which I'm writing about in my own words. The third thing, and then we'll get into more, we'll get into some specific examples, is to make sure that we're not just doing, providing overview and description, right? That is to say, I want to make sure that I'm making an analysis and argument that I have an effect and consequence. So I'm not talking about how important body cameras are. I'm making a subclaim about why the body cameras are so important, what effect they have, and what consequence they have, in my opinion, right? So it's not different than what we've been doing this whole class, right? We've been writing these argumentative analyses for every single one of our essays for RD1 and RD2 and now RD3. I want to make sure that I'm not just talking about, look how cool, these changes would be, right? I want to actually make points about specific consequences, specific effects that these changes or possibilities could have. Not to mention that if I'm analyzing, for example, in a paragraph, a problem, let's say I'm talking about, because we can have paragraphs that are either analyzing a particular problem within law enforcement. So maybe I'm going to talk about the current police training, right? How it happens now, and the fact that there is no kind of empathy training or cultural training or whatever it might be. So I want to bring in those. I not only want to say that, the fact that there's, I want to have a sense of what is the effect of the fact that there's no empathy or cultural training in police training, right? And by cultural training, I mean like understanding what are the cultural norms of different communities, right? So, there might be, some cultures or faiths that have certain practices that I don't want to violate when I'm sort of entering their home or communicating with them or interacting with them. But if I'm analyzing that paragraph, I'm criticizing the way that there is not effective cultural and ethical training. I want to show what is the effect and consequence of that. I don't want to just say like, that's a bad thing. There's going to be good, there's good and bad and all these things. I just need to make sure I have a sense of effect and consequence. So, and that's different from just saying like, this is what's going on. I'm saying this is what's going on and these are the problems it's leading to, and this is what could be and the benefits that it could bring. So those are things to think about in terms of overall comments. And I just wanted to raise a couple questions in green here. I kind of put that up before I wanted to, but that's okay. And just to sort of open it up, if there's things that people want me to sort of talk particularly about, that'd be good to hear about, in terms of what you still have questions about. I am going to talk about subclaims, analysis paragraphs, source use, central claims, introductions. And so those are the primary things I'm going to talk about today. And but are there other questions or concerns or things that you have questions about before I sort of dive into the rest of the presentation? And you can type them in chat or you can say them out loud.
No.
All right. Cool. Well, obviously, if there's ever questions, you know, please speak up, interrupt me, and I'll kind of keep, you know, every now and again, I'll glance over at chat to see if anything pops up, if you'd rather ask it there. And of course, you can always email me and or you can use the open discussion and or I'll be posting this to, you know, the discussion board in Canvas and you can ask questions there as well. Okay, let's move forward. Oh, yeah.
Wendy said she's having some issues with her internet and that she's going to connect as soon as possible.
Okay, cool. No worries. Okay, so we've seen this before, but I want to bring it back. In fact, this was in our last Zoom workshop, but I'm going to use this as a way to lead into talking specifically about subclaims and how to write stronger subclaims. These are literally the things that I do when I go back and I'm working on my own writing. These are literally the things that go back and check. And since these are the things, the reason I'm always talking about central claim, subclaims, analysis organization, introductions to the point where you guys want to throw tomatoes at me or worse, is because those are the key structures. Those are the key aspects of an argumentative analysis. So just taking a look at the prompt, once again, we have both analysis and argument at play here, like we've had in every single one of our essays. So what are we supposed to be doing here? We're supposed to be analyzing our selected field in terms of its current status, problems, and possibilities. And then we're arguing how this vision benefits a specific social issue or enhances the field itself. So the analysis is about how current status of the field or certain possibilities within the field are leading to certain problems or could fix those problems. And then the argument is about how this new vision enhances the field and or has a significance for a social issue. So I want to sort of flesh these things out in terms of examples to make them a little bit, hopefully more clear and more concrete, and hopefully to sort of add context and clarity to some of my feedback that I've left in your workshop drafts. So subclaims, this will be the last time, except for maybe my feedback on your RD3. This will be the last time I talk to you about subclaims, and I'm sure you're happy about that. Two parts to subclaims: the element and the analytical point, right? I don't know if you remember way back in our very first so a question came up about, sorry, hold subclaims for a second. There was a question about what's the difference between the WD3 and the RD3. The workshop draft is just the rough draft of your essay. And then you want to revise that workshop draft to create your revised draft. The revised draft is technically the final draft. Why aren't they called rough draft and final draft? I talked about that a little bit before. It really is kind of leftover from this class previously. Back in the day, well, actually less than a year ago, 2 semesters ago, every one of these writing classes used to have a final portfolio in it. And the final portfolio would involve you going back to one of your revised drafts, or 2 of your revised drafts, sorry, and revising it into a final draft. So technically the revised drafts weren't final drafts. So that's why they were called revised drafts. But the difference between the workshop draft and the revised draft is just, one is a rough draft, the workshop draft meant for workshopping, meant for peer review. And then the revised draft is the final draft. So those are the differences between those things. Okay, with subclaims, the element is, if you remember way back when our very first Zoom, I think it was our first, maybe our second Zoom actually, right? We took a look at The Bigger Picture by Little Baby. And we started pulling out different elements of the song and the video and blah, blah, blah. Elements are the specific aspects, the specific things that you are analyzing in relation to whatever your focus is. Now, before, the elements, in our last paper, it was about elements of your iconoclast, right? What are things that they do or they did or what are things that they have written or created or said or events they participated in or whatever it might be. Here it's a little more challenging because now we're talking about something that's a little bit more dispersed, right? A field. And so the elements are really about particular aspects of the field, a specific technology that can enhance the field, or a specific area of my field in need of change being changed. So it can be a specific area or technology or possibility. This will make a little bit more sense when we get to different examples. The reason I put technology there is because a lot of times the improvements on things are connected to issues of technology. Like I was saying with law enforcement, the use of body cameras or the use of enhancing police training, which will be an example we look at. So the elements in this case are a little bit different. We're not dealing with a non-traditional, you're not dealing with like a narrative in our non-traditional narrative, and we're not dealing with an iconoclast, a specific person, but here the elements are going to be like a specific area of the field. Like again, law enforcement, there's multiple areas. We're talking about aspects of police training, we're talking about aspects of police recruitment, we're talking about aspects of police administration, whatever it might be. And I can be writing about something, how that area is leading to certain problems as it is right now, or I can be writing about how changes to that area can lead to beneficial things. The analytical point is the effect, which is the immediate effect of that technology or that improvement, or the immediate effect of the problem. And the consequence is the larger impact of that. So the effect is about an immediate thing. What would be the effect of body cameras? What would be the immediate effect of body cameras? What would they allow for? And then what would be the larger consequence of that? So the immediate effect would be they would allow for police interactions to be available for public viewing, right? And the larger value and consequence of that is that it would not only sort of create incentive for police officers to act with more care and diligence, it would also allow for a sort of public oversight of police and public interactions. So the effect is kind of the immediate effect of either that area that's creating a problem or the possibility that might be creating a benefit, as well as the larger consequence of that. And this is just subclaims, right? And the subclaims are the first sentence of each of your support paragraphs. So let me get into some examples of this, and it'll hopefully be a little bit more concrete and clear. So with the subclaims, I just put that information up top there, or at least an abbreviated version of that information. So it's a specific tech or area of my field, or a specific possibility idea in relation to my field is the element, and the analytical point should have a sense of effect and consequence. So let me just take some examples here. So let's say I'm interested in talking about the way in which how we could improve elementary school education, right? So I can either have paragraphs that are critiquing the way that elementary school education happens now and the problems that leads to, or I can have a paragraph about proposing an idea of how those things could be better, or I can combine those things, which we'll look at in a minute. But so let's say I want to write about learning kits, right? I did some research into, and this is also just because I have a young son who's not in elementary school yet, of course, but right, there's these learning kits, right? You can get these learning kits, you can order them even if you just want to use them for personal use. They didn't really have them, but when I was in elementary school, but they're learning kits that give you like all the pieces and material you need to create like a sort of model circuit board, or they give you all the pieces of material you need to make like a model of a bridge if you're like interested in engineering or something, or they give you all the pieces you need to create an artwork or something like that. So there's these learning kits that are kind of like these all-inclusive things, right? You get your own pieces, it's real hands-on learning. So I'm like, you know what, that'd be cool if we actually used more of those in elementary school. I actually think it would improve, and maybe they already are, right? In fact, they are starting to do this more increasingly. I mean, in many cases, you got to do this perhaps in like your science classes, but maybe we could bring those learning kits to other fields. Anyways, so I'm going to write about learning kits. And though they're not nationally, they're not widespread, I'm I think they can help teach elementary school kids new skills. So right now, this is a very basic version of the subclaim. Learning kits can teach kids new skills. It's a little vague. It's not that there isn't an element there. There is learning kits. It's not that there is an analytical point, or at least we have but it's very general, right? So I want to look at ways to strengthen my subclaims. And so if you see comments on your workshop draft that say, make your element more specific in this paragraph, or strengthen your analytical point, put in a stronger sense of effect or consequence. This is what I'm talking about. So I'm going to build this up a little bit. I'm going to make one way I can do that is make the element, the thing I'm analyzing in the paragraph, more specific, right? So these are in particular STEM learning kits, right? So science, technology, engineering, mathematics. So I'm just going to, the STEM learning kits can teach kids new skills. Sorry, that L should not be capitalized there. But so one way to strengthen my subclaim is to make sure that the element, the thing I'm analyzing, the specific thing I'm analyzing in the paragraph is specific, right? The other thing I can do is specify the effect. Okay, now remember, I said the effect here is what is the kind of immediate effect of these things? Well, I'm saying it teaches kids new skills. Okay, but I could make that a little bit more specific. And I'm going to do that in two ways, right? STEM learning kits can teach elementary school kids technical skills. So I'm more specific there. Now, what I'm doing is I'm helping myself as a writer, right? I'm helping myself in terms of giving myself more stuff to say in that paragraph. So as much as it might seem like, oh, well, being more general, like the first version of this subclaim will, is better. It's not actually, because it's not good for your reader, because your reader is like new skills. Your reader immediately is wondering what skills, like be more specific about that. STEM learning kits can teach elementary school kids technical skills. Great. I have more of a sense of the effect being more detailed and specific. I also have that specific element. And the third thing I can do is make the consequence stronger. So what? What good are these technical skills? Well, STEM learning kits can teach elementary school kids the technical skills necessary for the jobs of the future. Okay. So boom, now I have much more of a sense of purpose, which is the analytical point, and I have a clear sense of what the focus of this paragraph is going to be about. And notice how I've also given myself a kind of vocabulary for the analysis of that paragraph, right? So, obviously all my evidence and examples in this paragraph, support paragraph, should be based around these learning kits. I don't want to suddenly talk about something totally different, like, I don't know, virtual reality games. That's something totally different. I'm going to be talking about evidence examples of STEM learning kits. So maybe I talk about a learning kit that's related to science, and maybe I talk about a learning kit that's related to engineering. And I just talked about the learning kit that's related to sort of creating a model bridge. And that could be a hypothetical example. Right? I'm just coming with that at the top of my head. The learning kit that I did research into was sort of creating a kind of quick like circuit board. So those are things that I can start to think about in terms of my evidence and examples. And then I have these ideas about technical skills, and then how these technical skills are necessary for the jobs of the future. So I had one student ask me in another class, like, are we writing about the field or are we writing about the issue? And I was like, well, you're writing about both, right? I'm writing about how these STEM learning kits are helping the field of elementary education. And then I'm writing about how they're helping specifically. The issue is learning. The issue is getting these kids to learn skills that are going to be most useful for them as they go into the jobs of the future, so to speak. So let's take a look at another example, and this example actually takes up the example that I was using earlier, and that has to do with so policing can be improved by technology, really broad. It's almost like that might be the statement in an introduction. For a subclaim that should start a support paragraph, that's way too broad. There's a lot of different aspects and areas of the field of law enforcement, and there's a lot of aspects of technology. I want to make this more specific, so I'm going to specify the element first, police training. So there we have a specific area. I want to talk specifically about police training, and I'm going to analyze how it can be improved. But improved by what technology? Well, police training can be more safe and realistic through new virtual reality technologies. Okay. So now you can already see I have a lot more to work with here, a lot more than I'm gonna be able to write about, right? So using virtual reality technologies is a way to make police training more safe and realistic. Now, so what? Now, obviously, safety is a good thing, right? For the most part. So that maybe is somewhat implied, but even if it's implied, I want to tell my reader why this is important. I also want to interpret it. I want to have that sense of consequence. That's what my reader is here for, right? They're not here just to say like body cameras would be great. No, they want you to tell them why body cameras would be great and what is the effect that you think body cameras will have and the consequence they'll have. So I'm going to develop that a little bit further. Police training can be more safe and realistic through new virtual reality technologies that increase police empathy. Now notice I have these ideas of empathy that I can work with. I can talk about the virtual reality technologies and use hypothetical examples or describe how that would work. Or if I find, a police department that's using virtual reality technologies in training and an example of that, I can bring that in. And I'm going to talk about these notions of safety and realism and those things. It'll give me a lot more to work with as far as those subclaims. So, or as far as this particular subclaim. So when I'm saying things like you want to work towards having a more specific element and a distinct effect and consequence in each of your subclaims, that's what I'm talking about here. That's what that refers to. So let me just sort of give you an example of, and this will wrap up subclaims here in just a second. I pulled some examples straight from our workshop drafts. And it's not expected that I have excellent subclaims in my workshop draft or excellent anything for that matter. The workshop draft is a rough draft. It's a draft in which I'm really just trying to get my ideas down on paper, start organizing them, start, molding them, if you will, into what will become an analysis and argument, an essay. But so here's 3 subclaims I pulled out of the start. Subclaims should be the first line or 2 of each support paragraph. So I just pulled these lines directly out of the start of various workshop draft support paragraphs. So here's one. 3D printing is pretty present in technology today and has helped so many industries. It can have a huge impact on the fashion industry. So this person is writing about the fashion industry, obviously, and thinking about ways that it can be improved and developed and enhanced, or is already in the process of that. And so they have a clear element here, right? They have 3D printing. You don't really need to be more specific than that. I mean, that's clear. So that's well handled here. So this is what I do when I revise. I go back. It's like a checklist for me. Do I have a clear and specific element in this subclaim of this analysis paragraph? Then am I connecting it to some sort of effect? Well, what is the effect of 3D printing here? We say that it's helped so many industries, and we say that it's having a huge impact on the fashion industry, but your reader is automatically like, what impact? What effect? And what is the consequence of that? So we don't really have a sense of the analytical point here. It's not that there's a problem with this sentence. It's not that the sentence isn't a good sentence, but as far as a subclaim is concerned, we want to make sure Are you guys still there?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Froze and
Yeah.
then stopped.
Okay. Yeah, it just totally bugged out for me. All right, I'm still, hold on.
Yeah, me too. It kicked me out. And
Okay. All right, I think we're back.
Yeah, it's a little glitchy.
Yeah, we're, my household, there's a few people on Zoom right now, so that might be my bad, so I apologize. Okay, are you seeing the 3D printing thing again? You're seeing the slides again?
yes.
Okay, cool. Thank you, Camila. So I have the element in the subclaim, but I don't quite have that sense of an analytical point yet. So let's take a look at another one. And hopefully it won't crash again. Digital technology has a big impact, and one industry positively affected by this is sports photography. So as far as a specific element here, we don't really have one. We have the field, which is sports photography that they're interested in. We do have some sense of element in terms of digital technology, but that's pretty broad. There's a lot of digital technology. So that's something that could maybe be more specific there. And then in terms of the effect and consequence, we are saying that it's having a positive impact, right? It's improving the field, digital technology, though we want to make that element more specific, but we're not really saying what is that positive effect. So having that more distinct effect and consequence is something we'd want to work on in that subclaim. And then finally, there's always room for improvement with schools, especially with the highly advanced technology today. You should be able to recognize right away that we don't really have a specific element there, and we don't have really a sense of effect or consequence. So it's not that these are bad sentences or that these are sentences that don't belong in it. No. It's just that as far as a subclaim is concerned, we want to be sure that we're starting our reader off. So why subclaims? Why the heck am I so insistent about subclaims? It's because it's about starting a reader off in each paragraph with a clear sense of what the paragraph is focusing in on, and then what the analytical point is. So the element and the purpose. That way your reader can sort of, it's about organization. That way your reader knows from jump, okay, I know that we're going to focus in on STEM learning kits here, and the author is going to talk about how these will help or enhance elementary school education by teaching kids new technical skills for the jobs of the future, right? So then once I set up that subclaim, my reader is comfortable. Okay, I know the point you're trying to make. Now do it, right? So then I can step back and sort of say, like, right, in recent years, right? Or I can bring up that idea that, in 10 years, right, the jobs, or kids are studying today for jobs that won't even exist by the time they're adults, right? So I can sort of talk about that, and I can bring in this idea of how, like, kids are still often thinking about those jobs that they think about, like, that they tend to think about when kids, like, I want to be a fireman, I want to be a think that way, but that we need to provide opportunities for kids to develop skills that will help them in the professions that will most likely exist when they're around. And so STEM learning kits do this because they give this data. So notice how if I just started out like, as argued by so-and-so, kids that are in high school today or elementary school today, the jobs that exist for them will be completely different. Da, 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 da. If I started off by talking about all that stuff, my reader's like, okay, that's interesting. Okay. What are you trying to get at? What are you getting at? And then I finally get to STEM learning kits. They'll be like, oh, that's what you're talking about. Instead, I want to just start off with that subclaim. Then I can set up some sort of explanation, exposition, explain what STEM learning kits are, give some examples of them, show the effect, and my reader will for subclaims for me as a writer. And I already talked about that in the last couple of slides, right? By making the elements specific, I'm forcing myself to stay focused in that paragraph on STEM learning kits. By making the effect and consequence more specific, I'm giving myself the language and the ideas with which to write about in that paragraph. So with the police training one, I'm going to be focusing in on virtual reality technologies, and we were focusing in on safety. I'm going to be talking about this notion of realism and these notions of empathy. So now I have a lot more to work with as a writer. Those subclaims help me organize and develop my thoughts as well. Okay, let's get off of subclaims here, and I want to move into support paragraphs. And how do we organize our analysis paragraphs? Analysis paragraphs, support paragraphs, same thing. I think analysis paragraphs a better word because that's more of what we're doing. We're not just providing support, we're actually analyzing something, right? I'm actively analyzing something. So the structure of these, this is going to look a little funky, like some sort of chemical formula, but that little sort of square with rounded or rectangle with rounded corners there just represents like a paragraph, let's say, okay? And so I want to start each of my support paragraphs with a subclaim. We just went over that, and that's going to have an element and an analytical point. That's what those abbreviations are. And then each of my support paragraphs, I want to make sure I get to at least 2 examples of the element of my subclaim. So with the STEM learning kits paragraph, I'm going to want to have a couple of examples of STEM learning kits. And I want to make sure I analyze those examples, meaning I want to make sure I follow through. Since I talked about learning technical skills and I talked about the jobs of the future, I'm going to want to bring those things up in the process of my analysis. That's the promise I made to my reader with the subclaim at the start. Now, do I bring in outside quotes? Sure, if I have one that fits, great, bring it in. That's why you see the asterisk next to the 2 outside quotes there. If you don't have an outside quote that fits there, then don't put it there. It'll just seem a little strange. Like I might have an outside quote that just explains what a learning kit is, or I might have an outside quote about the importance of hands-on learning, and I want to put that in, okay? Or the importance of technical skills, then that would be a great quote to use, but I don't have to use it if I don't have it. And then at the end of my each of my support paragraphs, I want to make sure I connect that subclaim back to the larger central claim statement. Right. So that's the way I transition. Is my reader will sense by connecting that analysis of that paragraph back to the larger argument, they sense that, oh, okay, you're done with this idea. You're showing how it relates to the bigger picture. That's the way you transition. So let's look at an example. And this is going to be a longer paragraph because it's from a revised draft. This isn't from a workshop draft. This is from a revised draft and a very similar assignment that is talking about changes to the video game development field or the video game industry. And this person had an argument going on about how the video game industry was becoming more diverse and more creative because of recent changes in technology and just recent developments that was allowing indie game makers to become more part of the market, right? Instead of the market being dominated by like Blizzard and Electronic Arts and whoever else that makes games. Major companies that make games obviously still do, but they were saying that there's a lot more indie game developers out there that are all bringing like a sense of diversity and a sense of creativity to the video game industry. Anyways, so this is one of their support paragraphs. The element they're focusing in on the support paragraph, or this is half of the paragraph. We're going to look at both halves. I just couldn't fit it on one slide. So subclaim, enhancements in computer sound hardware. So you see this is color coded towards what I have on the left, okay? So the element is enhancements in computer sound hardware. Do what? What's the effect? They relieve the instrumental and compositional restrictions composers had when creating music with primitive computers. And then what's the consequence of that? In order to create much more immersive music for players. Okay, there's a subclaim. I know as a reader exactly what this paragraph is going to be about. Now notice they get to their own example in their own words. The sound hardware on older computers can only play a few tones, which made composers deal with major restrictions in writing music. This is typically referred to as 8-bit music, such as that most notably found in Tetris, whose music consists of very simple melodies and harmonies that are looped throughout the game. The sound consists of beeps and bloops that cause the soundtrack to be difficult to listen to when playing the game for an extended time, making players lose interest in the game faster, or even worse, distracting players from focus and enjoyment. So notice that their first example here is critiquing the way sound cards used to be, or sound hardware used to be. And they have the evidence, right? They have the example of Tetris and its 8-bit music, and they make the point about that it led to distraction. It also led to players losing interest. And then they bring in the outside quote. Because notice they made the point themselves first, and then they say, as indie game designer Sal D'Argenio states, comma, quote, in the early days of digital music, computers weren't advanced enough to play back high quality sound files. Instead, they had sound chips that led to very simplified sounds that didn't match the energy of the game, right? So in that sense, I'm bringing in the outside quote after I've done my own analysis. But notice that the majority of the analysis, the evidence and analysis is in my own words, right? I'm sorry, I'm sure you guys can hear my son. Yes, Ebony, this is one paragraph. This is only half of it. I'm sorry if you guys can hear my son. He's having a little bit of a fit. He's not feeling well, so forgive me. Hopefully you can still hear me okay. So notice really what we have is the first half of the support paragraph. So it continues. However, the introduction of newer sound cards enabled the addition of high quality video game soundtracks. So now they're moving to a second example. This greatly improved the sound of video game soundtracks and the immersion of the players with the game. When contrasting the Tetris theme to a modern game such as Dark Souls 3, it is clear how much soundtrack creation has evolved. Dark Souls 3 is a video game that is known for its implementation of a grand orchestra in its soundtrack. The orchestra achieves a complexity within its melodies and harmonies that were unattainable during the age of 8-bit music. Modern technology allows for sweeping polyphonic scores to rival the Hollywood greats. Then they close the paragraph by analyzing and then connecting the subclaim back to the larger argument of the central claim, which is the orange, right? These sweeping polyphonic scores aid in creating a much more immersive sound. So that word, that keyword immersive, that was the word in the analytical point of the subclaim. And they're bringing that back here. For soundtracks and beeps on a computer, giving even indie video game makers the ability to have the orchestral complexity of Dark Souls 3. Such new, easy-to-use sound hardware not only allows for more immersive and unique games, but for indie games to strive in competition with major game companies. So there you can see that larger idea about indie games or indie game development competing with major game companies. And that way my reader knows, okay, they're connecting back to that larger argument. We're done with this paragraph. They can also see visually that the paragraph's finished, obviously. So notice that I'm sort of, if we take a look at I'm going to put the whole paragraph on the screen here. Notice that in terms of outside sources, yes, there's some of that, but it's not the predominant mode of analysis. That's just outside support. So we're getting, evidence, analysis of the evidence, outside quote, evidence, analysis, more evidence, outside quote, more analysis, and then connection back to the larger argument. So the majority of it is the author, right? It's the writer, bringing in the example of Tetris, bringing in the example of Dark Souls 3. And these are examples that they know and evidence that they know from their own experience. Or maybe they got mentioned in an outside source they found, and they thought they would sort of build upon that. Or maybe Tetris got mentioned as like the perfect example of 8-bit music, and they're like, okay, and then I'm going to compare that to Dark Souls 3. So it's not that you need a bunch of outside quotes to back you up. We're not writing a research paper. We are using research to support an argumentative analysis. Okay. Now, I want to show you a couple examples of some organizational issues that I've commented upon in a number of drafts, and how the paragraphs look very different without that kind of subclaim. Example 1, analysis. Example 2, analysis, outside quote, connection back to the larger argument. So one thing that often happens is people will sort of let the outside quotes dominate too much. So here they start by starting with an outside quote. You're giving all the authority to the outside quote. So indie game designer Sal D'Argenio states, in the early days of digital music, computers weren't advanced stuff. Suddenly Sal's running the show. We don't want Sal running the show. You should be running the show. So avoid beginning or ending your support paragraphs with an outside quote. Or analysis paragraphs, same thing. So, and then also notice here, we're getting all examples and outside quotes. We're not getting any analysis. There's no green here. So this shows that the sound hardware on older computers can only play a few tones, which make composers deal with major restrictions when writing music. This is typically referred to as 8-bit music, such as that most notably found in Tetris, whose music consists of very simple melodies and harmonies that are looped throughout the game. The sound consists of bleeps and bloops. However, the introduction of newer sound cards enabled the addition of high-quality video game soundtracks. When contrasting the Tetris theme to a modern game such as Dark Souls 3, it is clear how much soundtrack creation has evolved. Notice how they're not going into the analysis of that. What makes Dark Souls 3 so evolved? What does it have, right? In the other paragraph, we're talking about the orchestral aspects, and it's more immersive and stuff like that. Such new, easy-to-use sound hardware allows for sweeping polyphonic scores to rival the Hollywood greats, unquote. So here, the organization is preventing the sort of analysis, and it's preventing the author themselves to be the driving force and their ideas to be the driving force of the argument. On the flip side, here's a situation where we have just too much analysis, not enough specific examples. So recent technologies, and notice how the element is much more vague here. It's not, enhanced sound cards or whatever, sound hardware. Recent technologies have also relieved the instrumental and compositional restrictions composers had when creating music with primitive computers in order to create much more immersive music for players. Old sound cards that created bleeps and bloops caused game strategies to be difficult to listen to, making players lose interest, lose focus and enjoyment. As indie game designer Sal says, further, as Janet Lynch states, these sweeping polyphonic scores aid in creating a much more immersive. So notice how we're wondering, where's the examples of this? Give us an example of a soundtrack that could be boring, or a soundtrack that could be distracting. Give us an example of a new soundtrack or sound scheme that is more engaging and more immersive. So these are just two different paragraphs that I was sort of organizing. I was organizing the material from the other paragraph in a way that wasn't quite as effective. Okay, so I'm going to move on to central claim now. And we'll wrap up, or maybe we'll open it up for questions, but then we'll wrap up. So our central claim, which is our argument, right? So we talked about the analysis and how to structure that, how to develop subclaims and refine them. So now with the argument, how this new vision enhances the field and or has significance for a social issue. Okay, so the pieces of my central claim aren't that different from they're pretty much the same that we've been dealing with our first two essays. Okay, number one, I need to have the focus in place. So the focus, of course, is my specific field of interest. Number two, the issue, which is a specific social issue in terms of what is the issue or what is the problem that you feel needs revisioning. So, we're talking about the problem with the video game thing, or talking about there's a problem where, major game companies sort of dominated the scene for so long that all the creativity, it became very monotonous, right? So you get, Call of Duty game number 1000, right? And FIFA 2021, FIFA 2020, FIFA 2019, FIFA 2018. It's not that those games aren't any good, but this person was setting up in the context of their paper. The problem is that we just don't get that much diversity of games, right? Plus, big companies are less likely to take risk on experimental games out of fear of losing money, right? If I'm an independent game maker and it's really cheap for me to make a game, I can make games that address maybe more interesting issues that I want to talk about. I can make games that are a little out there, that are strange, that are experimental. And then I can post those on Steam or whatever, and I can advertise them on my own social media. Then I want to think about the impact. So the impact is both about the overall problem you see with the field and or the possibility within that field. Right. So if I was writing about the law enforcement thing, I'd be talking about how the problem is really this disconnection from the community and an overreach of power, right? And ethical violations within the police department. However, these things can be made better by sweeping changes in both police training and by integrating more sort of technology of transparency, or something like that. And the consequence is what changes can lead to for the issue field. What changes can the impact lead to for the issue of the field? So once we bring in that transparency technology, once we have sweeping changes to police training, what will that lead to? Well, maybe that'll make a police department with more ethics and with a stronger understanding of their communities, whatever. And then, of course, what's the larger significance of that? Why is it important to have a police department that has better ethics and better connection to the community? Well, on one level, yes, hopefully we would start getting a lot less people dying at the hands of police, in particular, people of color dying at the hands of police. And we would just have a better and more safe and more secure society, right? Where the communities all communities actually bonded and related to their police officers and vice versa, and had empathy and respect for one another. Okay, so let's take a look at some examples to again make this stuff a little bit more concrete. You can see I'm going to do a very similar thing that I did with the subclaims here. And I know this is long, guys. I know I'm talking you guys to sleep, I'm sure. No worries if you just can't help it and you're bored as hell and you got to go somewhere else, got to do something else. There will be this recording, but I just want to make sure I touch on these things so you have some ideas about what to do when it comes to developing your RD3. So with the central claim here, I'm going to bring in an example again from a separate essay from a separate semester. I think we might have looked at this example already, but so this person was talking about the field of physical therapy. They have an interest in going to physical therapy. So, and then the first thing they were thinking about was sort of what are the problems as they see it with physical therapy as it is now. And one of the problems they thought was that people just didn't have enough access to it. And that could be due to the fact that people either just maybe are not motivated to go to physical therapy, or more often it's due to the fact that people just don't have the insurance or can't afford health insurance, or people just can't afford the therapy period, particularly if they don't have insurance. Or it could be just the fact that they don't really are informed about it, or don't have the ability, meaning like physical ability, or they live in a very rural area where if you're going to go get physical therapy or effective physical therapy, you have to travel all the way to a city to do so, whatever it might be. Okay. So focus and issue and impact, again, these things are color coded. The blue represents the connective tissue between these things, because you're going to see with a central claim statement, it's about building on these ideas. It's again, cause, effect, or cause, impact, consequence, significance. So today's physical therapy technology expands access to patients who are normally excluded from needed treatment. So notice how you have that sense of possibility as well as the problem in terms of the impact. So the focus is physical therapy. The issue is this issue of access or being normally excluded from treatment. And the impact is that we can expand that access to patients. Now, so focus and issue to the impact. How does this have a sense of consequence, right? This increased access engages patients more fully and effectively, okay? So what does this increased access do? Well, it engages patients more fully and effectively, okay? So the impact is leading to a consequence, and this overall has a larger significance to provide equal opportunity for treatment regardless of ability or class status. So you're having that building one upon the other, right? Physical therapy, the issue is that a lot of people are excluded from that treatment, and that is probably something they set up in the introduction, okay? So today's physical therapy, as far as revisioning it, we can use certain technologies to expand access physical therapy. And what will that do? That'll engage patients more fully and effectively. And then it'll also provide equal opportunity for treatment regardless of ability or class status. Okay, now this is a well-developed, revised central claim statement. More often than not, again, I want to bring in some examples from our WD3s. The examples from our W3s are not going to be that well revised because, again, it's a workshop draft, it's a rough draft. We're working towards those ideas. So new listening technologies, including streaming platforms and new recording technologies such as digital audio workstation, as well as the social media sites, have drastically changed the way music is created and listened to by people around the world. So if I highlight this in terms of the things above, we have a long list of all the different, I mean, it's not a long list, but we have a list of all the different technologies that are having an impact, right? Or could have an impact upon the music industry, okay? And then we want to avoid having that list of possibilities or technologies. You can do that in the introduction. You want to avoid it in the central claim, because in the central claim, we want to have more of that sense of consequence and significance. We also do have a sense of impact here. We say that these things have drastically changed the way music is created and listened to by people around the world. But what's the consequence of that? What's the significance of that? That's not developed here yet. So we would want to tighten up the focus here, save the kind of description of all the different things that are out there that the music industry is being changed by, or that could change with, and then get to a stronger sense of consequence and significance in this central claim. So according to the techadvocate.org, there are many devices and apps out there in the world that can improve the experience of physical education for students. So they're talking about the field of physical education. These new inventions will improve teaching in general and also remote learning for both teachers and students. Now, again, we talk about many devices and apps and new inventions. So we have a sense of the focus, we have a sense of the field, right, of physical education. Sorry, that should have been in purple as well. And we talk about how these things can improve and will improve, but we don't say specifically how. What are the specific impacts of these things in terms of remote learning or teaching? What are the consequences of these things? What are the larger significance? So it's sort of underdeveloped in terms, again, of those things. Let's take a look at one more example. It's talking about journalism, right? And how the field of journalism is currently changing and could have a real important effect. So this new type of journalism is a purely unadulterated form of information, providing raw photographs and footage of events with the purpose of simply getting it out there rather than making money. The new strides in technology give every person an opportunity to be a journalist and reveal their perspectives on society to combat the plague that is uninformed and uneducated Americans. Again, we have a kind of long description of the possibilities and the changes that are happening within journalism. We do have a sense of impact. It gives every person an opportunity to be a journalist and reveal their perspectives on society. And that also leads to a consequence. It's going to combat or fight against the plague that is uninformed and uneducated Americans. But what is the larger significance of that? I mean, obviously, it would seem to be a good thing if Americans are more informed and more educated about social issues and journalistic issues. But we need to state directly what we feel that larger significance is. So maybe tighten up the focus here as well. We have a sense of the problem, right? The limitations of the drawbacks of the field. It's uninformed and educated Americans in our society, and how journalism, there also seems to be an issue of journalism being too focused in on money, or major journalism or big market journalism. So that significance, it's also usually the last thing to come. So it's something that just doesn't, usually in a rough draft or a workshop draft, it's not quite there. That's something we'd want to work towards. Okay, so let me bring back the original central claim here, the original example, I should say. Today's physical therapy technology expands access to patients who are normally excluded from needed treatment. This increased access engages patients more fully and effectively to provide equal opportunity for treatment, regardless of ability or class status. Now, if I ask myself a question in relation to this central claim, it'll really tell me what I need to do with my introduction. And this is the last thing I'm going to talk about is the introductions, and then we'll wrap up. So what does the central claim imply is the main problem or social issue with physical therapy? Well, it implies that access is the issue. People don't have equal opportunity. They don't have access, whether it's due to ability, whether it's due to class status. So if that's the problem, and what a problem that can be solved with a little re-envisioning, so to speak, then that is something that I'm going to want to set up in my introduction. So let's take a look at, again, a kind of map of a sort of introduction structure. And then an example, we'll take a look at an example like we did with the analysis organization. So really the goal of my introduction is not just to introduce the field that I'm writing about, right? And that I'm re-envisioning, so to speak. What I want to do is introduce the field, yes, but then give us a sense of context. And remember, this is one of the things that I mentioned at the top of this lesson, Just making sure you have those contexts in the introduction. So the context should also address, what is the current status of the field and maybe what problems or drawbacks does it have, as well as what new possibilities are out there and what might be the benefits of those possibilities, right? So, and then I want to end that introduction with a central claim statement. So taking a look at an example here, and this is the introduction to the example of the central claim with the physical therapy. In terms of these contexts over here, one is about the problem, one's about the benefits type thing. They can go in any order. It's whichever order you feel is most sort of conducive toward leading into your central claim statement. So for this person, and this is the first half of an introduction, this is all going to be one introduction. They start off with a context of how the field is, how new ideas and new technologies are creating benefits within physical therapy. So the emerging innovations of Nintendo Wii and virtual reality consoles have been slowly transforming the video game industry for the past few years. Now these technologies are joining other industries beyond the gaming world, such as healthcare, as fundamental tools. Between 2011 and 2017, the International Journal of Rehab researchers describes findings from their analysis of 126 studies concerning a total of 4,240 patients, quote, all of which focused on the use of commercially available gaming systems as a component of rehabilitation, end quote. The Nintendo Wii and the latest virtual reality system, Karen, are being used by all ages to improve attention and concentration skills, to keep brains active for educational purposes, and most important, to enhance physical performance. Physical therapists utilize these popular systems of interactive technology to help patients recovering from traumatic injuries or strokes, patients with disabilities, and the elderly strengthen their sense of mobility. So notice the first context they start with here is the context of the new possibilities for the field of physical therapy and the benefits of it. They even bring in an outside quote to establish how this is already underway, right? People are using video game consoles and virtual reality tools as ways to do rehab at home. Then they continue and they bring up the problem. Often the disadvantages of insurance costs or lack of motivation have prevented patients from receiving the required treatment they need. About 44 million Americans do not have health insurance, and another 38 million have inadequate health insurance, which often leads people to postpone necessary care. All right, so there's the problem, the context of the problem. So this is why we need a new idea, a re-envisioning of physical therapy. So you have all these people by the millions who are not getting the physical therapy they might need. Collaboration of easy access, visual entertainment, and remarkable physical benefits with these technologies provides all patients the chance to recover necessary treatment at their own convenience, to receive necessary treatment, even in spite of physical or financial limitations. Then they get to their central claim, which we've seen already. Today's technological trends of virtual reality and video games and physical therapy expands access to patients who are normally excluded from treatment. This increased access engages patients more fully and effectively to provide equal opportunity for treatment regardless of ability or class status. So I read through that really quickly, but just because we've read over it like 3 or 4 times. Notice with the structure of this introduction, and I'll just put the whole thing up here, right? I'm getting both a sense of context of the problem, right, which is in kind of the turquoise, right? And then using the outside source to establish the problem or the drawbacks or the limitations of the field. I'm also getting a context of what's changing or what could change or what things could add or make that field better, on the left here with the sort of green, white, and pink, the pink in particular. So I get both those contexts in place, and that allows me to establish the kind of social issue, right? Well, the social issue here is access, as well as it being engaging, right? So, I mean, the real problem is just people aren't getting that physical therapy. So we need to rethink therapy, not only to motivate people to go get it, but to also give access to people who don't have the financial ability or even physical ability to go seek out therapy, seek out treatment. So that's why I would say in the introduction, you're sort of setting up the problem, you're setting up the issue that your analysis is going to show a different viewpoint of, or how we can fix or resolve or get beyond that issue or problem. And that's what establishes relevance in terms of your paper. That's what establishes significance, is that context in the introduction. Okay. I'm going to stop out of this sharing my screen here. And I know that was a long blah of information. And I'm glad most of you guys stuck around for it. I hope it was useful. Are there any questions, even if it's not about what I just talked about? I mean, I just, dumped the dump truck right on your front lawn almost. But are there any questions? Ebony, yeah.
Okay, so for the introduction, so basically you were saying everything that you were supposed to like put into like the body paragraphs, technically, right? Just not like all the details.
So the analysis organization, all that was about, your body paragraphs. The introduction was the last thing I did, right? So the introduction, you have the two kind of pieces of context. The drawbacks or limitations or problems in your field right now. And then the other context is, how those things could be better with different changes, ideas, or technology, whatever. And then the central claim at the end of the introduction. The body paragraphs, which are analysis paragraphs, those are the subclaim, evidence, analysis, connection back to central claim. And then there's worksheets about all these things, of course. Like if you want like a hard copy, take a look at introductions and conclusions, which is in the worksheets, the course documents module and modules in Canvas. There's introductions and conclusions, which talk about the structure of both introductions and conclusions. And then there's analysis organization worksheet that talks about your body paragraphs, your analysis paragraphs. And then of course there's sheets on central claim and subclaims and other things, MLA citations there too.
Thank you.
Sure, of course. It's good to see you. Any other questions out there? Even if your question's not related to what I just talked about?
What did you do for Thanksgiving, Professor?
Oh boy, here we go. That's what everybody, that's what everybody really wants to know, I'm sure. I did really, my wife and I mean, normally Thanksgiving is a big family event. But we just stayed here and cooked. I love to cook, so, and my wife does too. And so it was just my wife and I and my son, and we did, we cooked up a bunch of food and just, I wish it wasn't necessarily relaxing because we're cooking all day. It's a big meal for a small group. And, but it was nice just to not have to work at least for one day. And so it was good. It's okay.
That's good to hear.
Yeah. I don't know what we did at night. We watched, I think I told you guys, we have this game that it's a game that I started where I put the 100 greatest movies of all time in a cup, like put them on little fortune cookie sized pieces of paper, the titles of them. And I put them in a cup. And anytime we're going to watch a movie, instead of fighting over Netflix ideas or fighting over whatever, or not deciding on anything on Netflix, we pull a movie out of the cup and watch it. And the rule is you have to watch whatever movie you pull out of the cup. You can't back out. Though I will say my wife falls asleep 85% of the time. So we watched a movie. That was it at night. All right, any other questions? I know I wish I already said it at the top, but I don't know. I hope one day that I will be able, we'll do another Zoom next week about the video essay. Obviously we want to focus as much as we can on the RD3 right now. And, you know, try not to, I mean, just do your best, you know, try and, you know, pull what you can from what we've been working on and learning and the feedback and all that stuff and the peer reviews and all the hard work that you've been doing all this semester, and just do everything you can. And give yourself a little bit of a break. This has been a very difficult semester, which you've heard me say 1,000 times. And so the RD3 is due Friday night, the end of Friday night. And same length as all the other papers, right? Normally it would be longer, but yeah, we're keeping it to minimum 1,200, maximum 15. And then the other requirements that are there, which I think it's 4 outside sources, 2 of them need to be scholarly articles, works cited, MLA citations, all that stuff. All right, any other questions before I step away or we say goodbye? Good to see everybody sort of and be in the same, actually, well, I'll just say goodbye and we'll shut off and then I'll stop recording. But I will post this recording to Canvas, obviously. Good to be in the same virtual space as you all. And I will stick around for a couple minutes after I say goodbye here. If people want to stick around for some questions, I can do that. Thanks, guys. See you next Tuesday, and you'll hear from me, as you know, via email shortly. Have a good rest of the evening, afternoon.
Have a good rest of your day, Professor.
Thank you. Thank you.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye-bye.